Very good morning, my dear students. So today I am going to discuss about the introduction to computer system. Under this introduction to computer system, what I am going to discuss the software. So before discussing that section of a software, I will going to emphasize on the part, that particular part we say it that it is a different pattern of the memory that we do have. Okay, so let us see what are the memory that we are having. Okay, so we see here that the memory that we have, this particular type of memories, that means there we have a primary memory or the main memory. So primary memory or the main memory that we are having on it, so each of this particular section, each of this particular part, we can find it that we have those sections of the memory, and we are working on this particular part of the memory. So as we are having this particular part of the memory, we find it that each of this particular memory, what we are working with, what the purpose of the memory is. The purpose of the memory is to hold the data and those the instructions that we are giving to the computer currently where we are working on it. Okay, so as we find it that as we are currently working on this particular arena, as we find that we are currently working on this particular part, each and every section of it that it will going to have a different patterns of work. Okay, it will going to make a different types of work, those the different pattern of work what we are working on or what we are making the particular structures. So each of these structures what we are doing, each of these structures that we find that we are working with, we are finding those structures and we are making those structures in a different type of ways. Okay, so we have a certain pattern of limitation. As we find that we do have a certain pattern of limitation, those the data what are there, data we find that we are storing the data and we are working with the data. So each of this particular data what we have, what we find that each of this particular data will going to have its organizational facts and it will going to work on it. Okay, so when we are having the data, when we are making those data, so each of this data what we find it, that data will going to have a different type of capacity, and based on this particular capacity we find it that we are having the data that we are keeping. So it has a limited capacity of data and data lost when the power is off. Okay, so when the power is off at that particular moment of time, we find it that we have a different types of data and we are working on these different patterns of the data, isn't it? So this is the different pattern of the data what we find, this is the different part of the data that we find that when we are working on it, when we are finding those data, each and every data what is there, each and every part of the data what is there, that we are making the data to be workable, isn't it? So when it is switched off, when we find the thing is switched off, all the thing from the memory will going to loss. That means it is what? It is a semiconducting device. This particular device is said as a semiconducting device, and this particular semiconducting conductor device what we see that memory we find it, those the memory what we have, the memory will not fast as register what it is there. Okay, the memory is not fast as register what it is there. So data and instructions what we require, data and instruction what we find, so each and every data that we are using, each and every data that we are seeing, isn't it? So all this particular data that we are making to it and we are working to it, we are having those particular structure of the data, we are giving the instructions to the data and data and instructions that required to be processed. Okay, so all the data and instruction what we can find that data and instructions are needed to be processed, and when it is required to be processed, that particular processing time, that particular processing moment when we are processing it, what we are going to find that there are the different type of sections what we find that it has different processing area and it does the different type of processing. So ROM versus RAM, that means how we can compare them, how we can find it that we can compare this particular thing and how we can have this particular data. So in the memory section, when we are talking about a memory section, primary memory, there is a difference between RAM and ROM. So difference between RAM and ROM, as the RAM and ROM is there, what we find, the ROM is what? ROM is a basic thing that we find it. RAM will be used for read write memory. Okay, so it will be used for your read and write memory, but this ROM is used for only reading purpose. Now RAM, what we find that when we need to store the data, lot of data we require to store, so all these different pattern of data what you are storing, data stored to be currently processed. That means at this particular time what the data we want to process, isn't it? So those the data we find it that currently processing that can be done in RAM, but required for booting purpose. If you want to require to boot your computer, if you want to require to boot the memory, that particular time what you require a ROM there. Okay, ROM is used here for this particular purpose. Next, the volatility of this thing, that means RAM, what you will going to write, that will going to weep off when the current is, when you switch off the power supply, but it is a non-volatile. What you will going to write it there, it will remain for a long duration of time. Now stand for, we know it, RAM stand for random access memory, and this is for read only memory. Now data, what we find it, data in RAM can be modified, that means we can change the data what we are giving, but ROM what we are storing, that we cannot modify it. Okay, we cannot modify those data, we cannot change those particular data. Next, what we can find it, that capacity or the size 64 MB to 8 GB, and it is smaller than that of the RAM. Okay, cost, what we can find of this particular area, the cost that we can find it, RAM is what? Costier, that means it has a cost is higher, but ROM, what we can find, ROM is cheaper than that of the RAM. So as we find it that we are having all these particular structures, we are finding it all this particular area, what we find that RAM we can divide it what? Static RAM and dynamic RAM. But this ROM we can divide PROM, means programmable RAM, EPROM, erasable programmable ROM, EEPROM, electronically erasable programmable ROM. Okay, so all this particular thing, when we find it that we are using this particular data structures, each and every data structures what we have, each and every data part that we are using. Okay, in our memory section we find it that those the memory what is there, those the part of a memory what is there, each and every part of the memory will going to have a different type of impact on it, and it will going to make a different type of changes on it. Now as we are talking of RAM, what we find that this RAM, there are two pattern of RAM. One is known as a static RAM, one we know as a dynamic RAM. So static RAM and dynamic RAM. What is a static RAM? Static RAM, we say it that this particular RAM is faster, very much faster, but dynamic RAM is slower. Okay, so as it is faster and this one is slower, we find it that we are having this particular thing. Next, what cost we find it, static RAM is expensive, but dynamic RAM is cheaper one. Okay, dynamic RAM is cheaper one. So this is the thing, another thing we can find. Next, what we say, the cache memory, use of the cache memory in static RAM is there, but it use the main memory. Okay, as it uses the main memory, what we find, the density is less densities and highly dense. Okay, now a transistor, in this particular transistor what construction we find, it is complex and transistor is latched, but here we find the capacitor and there are few transistor is been used. Now signal, what we can find, there is a 6 transistors we use to send the signals there. Okay, 6 transistor is used to send the signal, but here you find only 1 transistor is there to use to send the signal. So charge leak property not present. Okay, but here you find that present, hence we require the power to refresh. Now power consumption in this, it is a low consumption power, it is dynamic RAM is a high consumption of the power. So this is what we can see, this is what we can find it, that when we are working on this particular structure, when we are finding this particular structure, each and every structure what we have, each and every part what we have, that that particular part we are seeing the structures and we are working with this particular structures, isn't it? So this is how we can see here that we do have a different type of memory and we are working on the different patterns of the memory that we find. Okay, so in each of these particular different types of memory and different pattern of memory that we are finding, that we are having the data and we are storing the data. Okay, so as we find that we are having the data and we are storing the data, we find it that how these particular structures can be constructed. Okay, so how we find those the data to be constructed? That means we have to see one section that is said as what? That is said as your software. So if you have a software in that, we can find that what is the software that we are using. Software means we can find that we have a studies of this particular different type of physical component. We are seeing that we do have a different pattern of the physical component. As we are having those physical component, that we say it that it is a hardware. Okay, like we find it the hardware is there. So what the hardware we can see here, that like your RAM, then ROM, all these things what we can find, that each of this particular RAM and ROM what we are having, what we find is those particular RAM and ROM are working with the features, working with the part that we are doing for a different purposes. We are having these things for the different purposes. So as we are having those things for the different purposes, those the hardware what we have, those the hardware what we find, that each and every hardware what is there, that they has some physical existence of it, isn't it? So since we find the thing has got some physical existence, okay, those the physical existence that we find, those the physical existence that we find it, that we are having those structures and we have a set of instructions there. Those instructions who will take? The instructions will be given by some of the operand or set of the operands. So as we are giving those operands some of the instructions, we find it that each and every instructions what is there, that is what those the things we cannot see. So comprising a set of instructions, we can find that we have a different type of executions that we are doing and that we are making it out. Okay, so we are seeing it that we have a different set of instructions. So as we are having a different pattern of instructions, those the different pattern of instruction what we find, that and each of the instructions when we are doing so, when we are finding it, we find it that all those particular instruction what is there, all this particular part what is there, that is been operated, that is been worked in a different form of scenario that we are working with. So software we do require. If you take a human body, we can find in a human body also we do have a different type of softwares, isn't it? Like in our brain what we find, in this particular brain, the divided into a different part. So all those different sections they are working for a different purpose. Some portion help you to see, some help you to talk, some help you to do some other work, etc, etc. So all these things what we can find, all this part what we can see, that they are going to work and they will going to have our desired things. So similarly for the devices also we can find that we are using the different type of software in different devices, like Windows 7, Windows 10, Ubuntu, isn't it? Or you can talk about that your mobile phone. In a mobile phone, what you are using? You are using in your mobile phone the Android software. Some mobile you are entering Android software, some mobile you are using the OS, so OS what, Window OS being used. So different type of softwares we are using. As we are using the different pattern of software, so each of this particular software, what we find, each of this particular pattern of software, that we can see that they help us to do the different type of work. Okay, and they help us to give a different type of output. Like if you want to print something, that is what, that is your hard copy that you are taking, but you can see the diagram, you can find it, that particular diagram what is there, those the particular diagram that we are doing in the computer, that is been said as what, that is been said as your soft pattern or the soft copy. So this is how you can find it, that we can have a different type of softwares and you can work with a different pattern of software. That means from here you can derive one thing, the software is an organized instructions. That means we have some organized instructions of the program of a various computers for a various purposes. Okay, so those the thing what we are doing, those the part what we find it that we are doing on it, we are making the software to be workable. That means we are getting some code, we are getting some instructions. So who are doing those works? The software is doing this work. So different computers, different machine, different devices, what we say, that we do have a different type of software for a different purpose. Like we have a software for giving a security of your system. Okay, antivirus software is there. We have a operating system software to run your particular device. We have a software to do the diagram. We have a software to design the different type of animations, animated softwares is there. So many different patterns of software that we can find, that each and every software what is there, we are working, we are finding that we are working on this software, and we are getting the different type of softwares, and we are having a different type of work from there. Okay, so what is the main purpose? We can find it, main purpose of the software is to convert the data into an information. Then we are getting the different type of business. Okay, different pattern of business dealings are there, that has also been done. Scientific investigations and engineering problem, that is also been done. Then it's run the embedded system, it also help to run the embedded system. And what we find, there is an office automation and for the educational purpose. So for all this particular thing, what we can find it, that we are using all these things and we are working on the particular structures, where we see that how we can find the software can be usable and how we find it will going to work on it. Okay, so this is the thing what we see, that how the software is working. That means now when we find that we have a different type of software, based on this particular software what we can find it, that each and every software what is there, so all this software has a different sole purpose, they has their own purpose of working. And since they has their own purpose of working on this particular area, on this particular arena, we find it that how we are making this particular structure to be workable. Okay, so as we find, as it is been working, we are having those different type of softwares, we are making those different patterns of softwares. So each and every software what we have, they have a sole working purpose. So software what we know, that how the different hardwares are there, and based on those different hardware components what we can find, that we do have a different type of softwares are there. Okay, so all those different type of hardware that we find, all those different pattern of hardware, we can find it that each of the hardware has the different type of instructions that the hardware will going to see it. So each of the hardware what we find, those the instructions what are there, those the pattern of instruction what we can find, that each and every hardware require the pattern of instructions, isn't it? So all these different type of instruction that we are seeing, all these different way that we are taking the instructions and we are giving the instruction, we can find that each and every instruction what is there, that the instruction will going to work For which purpose? For the purpose of the hardware, isn't it? So we require a software, we require that pattern of software which will make your hardware to work. Okay, so as we find that we have a pattern of software, that particular pattern of software will going to make your section to be work, then we are working on this particular structures, and we are dividing and the different type of software understanding phase, isn't it? So depending on the instructional phenomenon, depending on the instructional part, what we can see, what we can find, that those the softwares what are there, those the part of softwares what are there, that will going to work, that will going to see that we are having a different patterns of the software system. What are they? Mainly we say we can classify the software into three parts. What are those three sections? One is a system software, one is a program tools, another is an application software. So this is how we can see that we have a different pattern of software, and we are working with a different types of software, that is the software we need for the different purposes. Okay, so today I am ending my session here. Thank you all.